there it goes. This is new, guys, so you'll have to excuse us if we get a little off.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. I'm Mark Siegel with the Siesta Key Coalition, coming to you from Georgia. I'll be back down there in 2 weeks. I was down there recently. Thanks to the SKA for giving me some time to share our perspective on the proposed hotels. I'm going to have about a 15-20 minute PowerPoint presentation at the end. Perhaps we'll have some time for some questions. I'll defer to Catherine and Jean as to whether we have time, and let them direct that. If we don't get to everybody's questions, you can always email me what's on the screen there, skcoalition@gmail.com, and we're watching that fairly closely, and we'll respond to that. So let me jump in right away. What is the Siesta Key Coalition? Well, we got rolling as a grassroots effort really just recently back in June. And it's a number of association board members and owner representative of some of the condos that surround one of the proposed hotels led by Robert Anderson near the village, wrapping around Foxy Lady on a little less than an acre, 8-story, 170 room proposed hotel. And we got approached by that developer that in an effort to kind of win over some support, that did some presentation to a number of board associations. And we started to share a lot of concerns following those presentations, reached out to each other, and we all got to know each other very well. Since then, we've grown. I think at last count, we were up to 16 or 17 major neighborhood or condominium associations that are directly involved with our concerns and share our concerns. And that's growing every week as additional associations come on board. Equally importantly, we're in strategic coordination with the SKA, but also the Siesta Key Condominium Council. And collectively, we all represent about 8,500 member households between us. But we initially started out with the primary goal of educating the public on not only the hotel plans, but applicable regulations, code, zoning of the hotels, and more importantly, the danger of some of the precedents that would be set on the key if based on the request of these hotel developers, and also the consequences that would adversely affect the key relative to density and intensity if these plans were to go forward. Something about us also is we are not anti-development, and we are certainly not anti-economic growth. We believe in redevelopment. It's appropriate. We want our Siesta Key to thrive. We want the businesses to grow. But the caveat is we really want any kind of development to be done within the existing zoning and codes and policies. We would never oppose it if it was compliant. Now, these hotel projects that are being proposed by Dr. Gary down near Stickney Point and Robert Anderson up by the village are very much in excess of and outside of those existing policies and zoning requirements. So we are now kind of preparing to engage in the public process as these hotels may be going forward. One of them has already stepped into the neighborhood workshop stage, and that from there things will progress to planning commission hearings and board of commissioner hearings. And so our group prepares to engage in that process as things and if things proceed with these developers. And we come at this process not as crazy, irrational neighbors with narrow self-interest and a lot of emotion. We spend a lot of time educating our members on facts and being objective and truly being stakeholders that love our barrier island is really how we come at all of our situations and always open to dialogue with those developers. We jump here and talk a little bit about these references that you'll hear, special exceptions and amendments. There are 3 hotel proposals that are now on the table. As I said, the Robert Anderson Village one that originally got our group going and is probably the most egregious of the 3 presentations. The Dr. Gary down at Stickney Point that has a lot of the similar kind of exceptions and amendments being requested. And then there's a proposal by the existing Siesta Resort, which is an existing 55 unit hotel that's up by the village that's been there for a long time that has put into increase its density, but otherwise is very different than these other proposals. So our focus has really been on the primarily the Robert Anderson as well as the Dr. Gary hotels. Let me talk a little developer speak. I'm a commercial developer of 30 years. So I'm a little out of my element to be opposing development since I've been on the other side of it for most of my career, but felt compelled to get involved in that. But in our industry, when you buy a piece of commercial land, you have certain rights. We call those by right zoning things. And these two hotels are on commercial general CG zoning. And a lot of people don't realize this by the way things are described, but commercial general zoning by right does not allow transient accommodations or hotel use. For that, they have to go through this very public process that'll go on for a year or 18 months in order to get that special exception. It's a big deal. They'll talk about it as if it's a small thing, but it's actually a very big thing. So by right, the land that Dr. Gary owns and also Robert Anderson owns does not allow transient accommodations or hotel use when they buy it. The other thing is that they're only allowed to a 35-foot height requirement above the base flood elevation. But both of these hotels are attempting to get that increased to 80 to 83 feet, which would take them up to 93 to 98 feet in total, which is twice the size of a 4-story condominium project that might be compliant with height. So that's a major variance that they're attempting to also obtain a special exception for through the public process. But more concerning than even the material special exceptions are the amendments that they're seeking to revise, and in the case of the Robert Anderson, actually circumvent the longstanding uniform development codes that are applicable under the Siesta Key Overlay District. And also there was a comprehensive plan done by Sarasota County that included a future land use for the barrier islands, and they're also attempting to either remove transient accommodations from those or double the amount of density that are applicable under those to really customize, in the case of Dr. Gary, their plan to exactly what their needs are. So the concern really is that these well-funded developers are attempting to change things that have protected us for a long time, and that sets a very dangerous precedent. And keep in mind that it could be debated whether it's 30 acres or 44 acres, but of similarly commercial zone, but between the two of them, they're using less than 3 acres. So there's a lot of commercial land on Siesta Key, and setting precedents for higher density, taller buildings and transient accommodations can be quite impactful and is above and beyond just what happens with these two properties. So I'm going to jump now to something that is near and dear to Catherine's heart and all of the Siesta Key Association and ours as well, which is the Siesta Key Community Plan of 1999. This is a very visionary document that was done back in '99, and it actually, the process really commenced in 1997 and was finalized in 1999. And the players and stakeholders in that, which included some pretty prominent folks, our own Alan Mayo, who is now a county commissioner, was in fact a planning commissioner at that time. So kudos to him for putting together his input in this, and I really hope he sees this as a legacy document to protect. But Nora Patterson and other prominent folks were part of this process. What was special about that process was back in 1997 and 98, there were a lot of workshops held directly with the residents of Siesta Key, and their input was a big part of the Sarasota officials and leaders putting together this Siesta Key Community Plan. This became the foundational document for the Siesta Key Overlay District that was put in place and adopted a couple of years later, and also influential on the future land use policies of the barrier islands. So that process really led to the regulations that are in place to protect our barrier island overall. So what I want to say to you about is, despite the fact that this was done in 1999, I would say, in reading it a couple of times as I have over the last couple of weeks, it's more relevant today than it was in 1999. And I'm going to read you some excerpts from it. I'm going to start with the future land use policy, and this comes right from what these Sarasota leaders defined as the designation for the barrier islands. What they said was the barrier islands are a unique land use category and development is of special concern. And to underscore these special consideration, and this is the key thread throughout this whole document, density and intensity of future development may not exceed the allowed, what is allowed by existing zoning. Think about that for a moment. Now put it in perspective that these hotels are the exact poster child of what these leaders would have been concerned about when they say density and intensity. Going a high-rise hotel with the amount of density per acre, avoiding the transient limitations on density. These were the kind of very things that this document and what led to these regulations was intended to prevent. I'll come back to that in a while, but what I want to jump to now is a couple specific areas that transient accommodations can really impact the key. The first one I'm going to touch on is public accesses to private beaches. A lot of people don't know that 90% of Siesta Key beaches are actually privately owned. Yes, there are 12 public accesses, but there's only 2 public beaches, the Siesta Key public beach and the Turtle Key, or the Turtle Beach itself. The rest is really primarily privately owned, mostly by some of the high-rise and mid-rise condominiums along the waterline. And what the public really clearly misunderstands is that there is something called the mean high water mark. Think about it as the wet part of the beach is seaward of that line, and the fluffy sand is to the landward side of that line and runs all along our private and public beaches. Technically, when you walk on one of those 12 access points, you are allowed to access the Gulf, to walk along the water line, to be on the wet part of the beach, to swim, to fish. But the moment you want to set up camp, technically you're on private property. And most of the condominiums to date have accommodated that and let the public do that. But there's growing confrontations or growing tensions that have happened, especially during COVID when Florida shut down a lot of beaches, and we saw our first glimpse of what it would be like to be really crowded on our beaches. And since then, you've seen a couple other condominiums have to take the step of hiring security guards, of roping off, or putting up signs to restrict the public to coming onto the private part of their lands. So I want to ask a couple of rhetorical questions for you to reflect on, and hopefully for the commissioners to reflect on too. What happens when an increase in crowding causes all these private owners to restrict all their private beach areas along the whole 90% of the private beach? And everyone, including myself, anyone on the mainland coast of Sarasota that enjoys the public beaches, or all the visitors that are renting in our condominiums, suddenly have to all go to the one public beach, which, as you know, during the peak is already crowded there. And then also these hotels that are being proposed are obviously already marketing their proximity to the beach. Robert Anderson, directly across from one of the popular access number 5, which currently is allowing the public on its private beaches to camp out there. And then Dr. Gary is most proximate to access number 12, which the only way for a hotel guest to access would be to navigate their way across Stickney Point and then across to Midnight Pass, and then come back to it, walk along a very narrow area with only 20 diagonal parking spaces, and then arrive at a place where it's roped off with 2 private condominiums on either side. So the question I've asked and haven't gotten a good answer to is, what exactly are these hotel developers thinking that their people are going to access the beach? How are they going to get there? Is it a safe way to get there? And what kind of impact would that do? And if these private owners suddenly close off those areas, not the access to the water, but close off the beach areas, all of those hotel guests, which we're talking 405 net rooms and 810 guests, are going to have quite an impact on our public beach. The question is, will we still be rated number 1 by Dr. Beach, who takes into account accessibility and crowding? How will it affect the environment? We already saw, and it wasn't probably coincidental, that half the amount of sea turtle hatchings happen, and also bird nestings were way down this year when we had crowded issues. This is our barrier island. These are the things that attract people to us. So spoiler alert to all those that might wonder what's the big deal about a hotel being built on Siesta Key. If you live in Sarasota County, even on the mainland, and love to come to the beach, your access and your crowding and your ability to find parking and all those things is going to be exacerbated when 810 guests from these proposed hotels hit the beach. To put it in perspective, there's only 900 public parking spaces on Siesta Key Public Beach. So imagine when you add the Promenade Hotel, which is in planning across there, we're talking about 1,000 some guests. That would have a pretty material impact on our beaches. Let me jump next to another topic that transient accommodations has a big impact and was anticipated by, again, our Sarasota commissioners and planning commissioners and the people on Siesta Key back in this 1999 visionary document when they were asked to talk about how they wanted to grow, what we needed to consider as we went into the future. Let me just read you an exact excerpt from the transportation section of that 1999 document that our Sarasota County officials wrote. Anyone who has driven on Siesta Key knows that it can be slow going, especially during the winter season, and it's not going to get much better. Several road segments on Siesta Key function per the Department of Transportation at a level of service graded E or F. I've never gotten an E, but I have gotten an F, and it's not good. And now imagine what those grades are today. It hasn't gotten any better. And by the way, those segments that they're referring to are the exact segments that interact down at Stickney Point and where Ocean Boulevard transitions into Beach Road right in front of the Robert Anderson Hotel. Not to mention, we only have 2 bridge accesses to the key. So this was a concern back then by our officials. I don't understand why it wouldn't be a concern of our planning officials today as we're talking about some major large-scale hotels being built. Another noteworthy point is all the pedestrian and bike traffic. There was a quote in that document that said Siesta Key has more pedestrian crosswalks per square mile than any other area of the county, in recognition of the heavy pedestrian traffic in the village, in the South Beach area, and on the beaches. So again, our officials were aware of that back then, and this is the kind of issues that they put in place, these zoning protections and density and intensity limitations to protect against. So I'm going to give you a little perspective as I wind down the last part of my presentation. Siesta Key, if you were to wrap up our mission statement in one sentence, it would be this: we strongly favor economic growth on Siesta Key, but not at the cost of so many adverse consequences, or if it involves revising and circumventing existing protective policies, regulations, and codes, which of course these 2 particular hotels very much do. We very much don't want to kill the golden goose. We have the #1 beach, and as one of our commissioners once said, Sarasota County is really special. It's diverse. It has a lot of unique, attractive areas, the cultural areas around the Ringling, the cool Main Street vibe that you have in historic areas of downtown Sarasota, the marina, and of course our barrier islands. There's no reason to accommodate county staff and try to simplify our codes to have the barrier islands treated like everywhere else, or to make amendments to address problems that don't have anything to do with the barrier island. This is a risk. And again, this is a golden goose. Our barrier island generates more hotel tax revenue or revenue than in fact downtown Sarasota does. And we certainly generate more revenue than we use in resources from the county. So let's protect that asset of Sarasota County. And I read in some of the papers recently a really positive thing that a lot of the commissioners cited, which was our Sarasota County per a citizen opinion survey ranked as either excellent or good the quality of life in Sarasota County. I 100% agree and applaud that. But there were a couple other statistics if you dug into that survey that were noteworthy to bring up that let you know what's on the mind of our Sarasota citizens. when asked what is the most important issue facing, the largest percentage of response was population growth and new development. But actually more interesting was when asked what issue has the greatest gap between what is important to us and I think somebody needs to mute. I think it's Janet Ann. Oh, there you go. No worries. I've done it many times. But this other issue that I want to point out that was in the citizens' opinion survey was they did this gap. What issue had the largest gap between what was important and what was the actual experience of Sarasota County? And number one largest gap was the traffic flow specific to the barrier islands. Again, that's people from the mainland trying to get to their beaches and come over to Siesta Key, but it's also people trying to get off Siesta Key as well. And again, we only have 2 bridges, and we're now talking about 2 very large, or three proposed very large scale hotel developments. I'm going to end with this slide in what I call a call for leadership. And I'm now speaking to the planners and the commissioners. What we really need is big ideas, not big buildings. And what I mean by that, there's a lot of better alternatives to a high-rise Marriott to generate economic growth and enhance properties that are in need of redevelopment on the Key. We agree with both of the desire to constantly enhance our assets, but we really love to meet with commissioners and leaders and share some of those ideas, but we don't believe the answer to economic stimulation on the Key is to build large-scale high-rise hotels and exacerbate more adverse consequences. The other mistake I think that can be made is we're coming up on 3 hotel proposals, and my big fear is that the commissioners are going to just take these things one off rather than doing what they should do is probably step back and evaluate so that we don't underestimate the impact that these 3 hotels, let alone the one that was already planned right across the bridge in the promenade, could have on our Key and the precedents they could set. I'm calling for the Board of Commissioners to really maybe step back and look at an integrated impact assessment on a few topics. One is to really reflect on the precedent that these exceptions will set and the amendments to the county regulations that have a broad reaching county-wide or area-wide. And let's not be fooled by the fact that if somebody restricts it to an area like Stickney Point, that doesn't set a precedent for other developers to sue the county and try to get the same exceptions for their other 40-some acres on Siesta Key. The other thing is there has never been a comprehensive traffic or pedestrian study done on all of Siesta Key. Certainly one not that considers the impact of 3 major hotels plus the Promenade Hotel and what kind of impact it will have on already congested areas during the peak and these road segments that were graded E and F back in 1999 and are worse and more crowded today. And then the last thing is there's clearly growing tension of these public access to the private beaches. There needs to be a public-private solution. That solution needs to be thought about before we just build 2 large-scale hotels right across from private or public access to private beaches and exacerbate the issue. So what I'm really asking for is to our leadership in Sarasota County, honor the wise recommendations of that 1999 Siesta Key Community Plan. It's relevant today. Its wisdom was very special, and the documents that it created, the Siesta Key Overlay District and the future land plan and the way it protects intensity and density are things that we need to cherish, protect, defend against. And so I'm really looking, and we're really looking, and I'm now talking about the thousands of voices that not only our collective organizations represent, but the thousands of voices that love Siesta Key and call it their home. We listened to those people back in 1999 when we created these protections. We need to listen to them now, and I'm really looking for which leaders are going to step up and do that. So at this point in time, I'll defer to Catherine as to whether we have time for any questions, or if we get into the more interesting and fun topic of mini reefs. I think you're on mute, Catherine.
I just took it off. Here I am.
Okay.
I believe we have maybe about less than 10 minutes, and what my hope was that people who had what I would call more complex questions, if you would send them to the Siesta Key Coalition at Gmail, so that it could be answered fully, or even with some documentation that you might be interested in. That might be helpful right now, because we do have a couple of other very important things, and we are going to be meeting in January on the 7th. So with that, I would suggest if anyone just has a quick question for clarification, we will go till 1:45. So,
Hey, Catherine, it's Mike here. How are you today?
now, who is managing?
Mike is talking.
Okay, I'm just asking, are you coordinating this, Jean?
I can. Mike,
Would
you
you
got
please?
2 minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
Great, great, guys. Happy to see everyone. This looks like it's a very good, successful meeting. I have a plan. I've been putting together several points where it comes down to, it's very clear to me, it comes down to quality over quantity. And when we do that, I have a plan to get us there that is very inexpensive. But what it will do in return is it'll give us back our quality that we're missing, especially since, you know, they built so many rooms off the quay and downtown, that will likely generate our income by another 50%. So quality over quantity will add 50% income to what we're seeing today, the 20-something million. We can easily add another 10 million to taxable revenue. So I'll share that with you shortly. It's just in a messy draft so far.
Okay. Thank you,
Thanks,
Michael.
Mike. Thanks, Mike. Who else has a quick question?
Question.
Here,
Did you unmute?
Yes?
this is a pretty quick question. I have the sense that Mark is preaching to the choir here. Where do we have to go to make an impact?
Send
How
his-
can
what
we
he just
augment
presented.
this presentation to the county board? We have had very little luck with them. My wife was at a county commissioners meeting last week for a silly little 22 parking space here on Ocean Boulevard that they want to make our entrance to the village look like a strip mall. And we got nothing out of them. And I can just see it rolling along. They're going to spend $300,000 on 20 spaces smacked up against the Whispering Sands access way on Ocean Boulevard. But where
Mark,
do we go to make an impact where the commissioners maybe will listen to this, will take an overall view, as you suggest, all of these hotels at once, the whole thing, and look at this plan and decide that they're going to follow the rules that are in this plan and stop screwing around with it?
Right. Well, that's a great question. If you want me to, Catherine, I can field that. I mean, first of all, it's one of the philosophies that we have. Again, I'm a commercial developer of 30 years, so my perspective when I arrive at this, and it kind of goes back to some comments Mike just made, we have to speak the speak of the commissioners. We have to understand that they, in fact, have a job to do as well. And right now, their job, probably whether we do or don't agree with it, is to grow revenue in Sarasota County and coming out of a pandemic and things of that nature. And that's going to be on their mind. And so what we can't be is, we can't be, as I mentioned before, we can't be those emotional red shirts screaming and yelling neighbors who just have a narrow interest of what's happening. And, you know, the Robert Anderson Hotel, for example, would wipe out my view of the Gulf, but I don't think that's white noise to commissioners, because that's a very small-minded thing in there. It's a very relevant point, but it's a very small point when they consider broader issues. And so our interest is really, and my interest really, is what it does to the key. What we have to convince them of is that this isn't an issue as to whether you are not okay with a hotel being developed on the key. What it's an issue is, what are the adverse consequences that come along with that decision? Because these are not boutique hotels as they're described. A boutique hotel might be 50 rooms, 10 to 90, in the industry language, and we're talking about 120, 170 room hotels here of doing that. So this isn't just a high-end little boutique hotel that's not getting impacted. These are major developments. So we have to talk their talk. We have to talk economics. We have to understand that this isn't about us just fighting growth and trying to avoid change and trying to not, find ways to have vibrant ideas. We have to bring our own ideas to those commissioners. But most importantly, folks, we have to talk factually. We have to be objective. We have to be unemotional. And it's why I'm trying to get every single association, whether you're a neighborhood out there or a major condominium, to join our list on the coalition, because when we sit down with those commissioners, when we get that opportunity, whether it's at a hearing or it's face to face, I want to be able to speak with people that have taken the time to got educated, and for them to understand that we are talking about every one of the homeowners on the key that want you to hear their voice, not just a certain neighborhood, not just people directly impacted next door to the hotel.
Okay, Mark, can I add to that? I want to,
Jen, oh, I'm sorry.
give me a minute and I'll give you a second. I was
Okay.
gonna say, go to the website. Mark has a letter. He's trying to get the coalition together and the homeowners associations to develop a letter to send and join. That's one of the ways we can do it, is to show our numbers.
Yeah, go to that webpage and you'll see a lot of content on there. There's some great articles that Rachel Brown Hackney has wrote, as well as Bryn Meacham with the Observer, with Tim Fanning of the Tribune. But more importantly, there's a lot about our content and all that. But what we really want to do at this point is we got to speak as one voice in an objective way. And I really would like to be able to say that we represent every major condominium and every major neighborhood on the key.
Okay, Janet, you wanted to say
Yeah.
a few things?
Yes, Mark, this is Janet Emanuel. I just sent you a fairly long email that I got from Todd Derry, who's the manager of the planning services, because things have changed a little bit. For Gary's, they've already presented 3 petitions, 2 for the special exception, and 1 for the comprehensive plan, and they really are already being reviewed. There's reports on them, some are incomplete. And previously, they had to do the neighborhood workshop first. Because of COVID, they've changed it. So they're doing some reviewing, and then the neighborhood workshop comes in, and then the planning and the county commission. So some of this stuff is, we don't even know about what they've been approving, or, what reports were submitted, but it's kind of circumventing the neighborhood portion concerns first. And they're going through all these, land use petitions and things like that. So it was a pretty long email that I got when I was looking here, and I did send it to you. So check your email.
And I saw it, it was flagged for me.
All right, is that it, Catherine?
Yeah, I just want to quickly, can I just make a comment? We've been working on a lot of this since, I guess, the end of last June, and we've been doing it without even the ability to have public meetings. So it's not just us, but the county as well. So just know that whatever you're seeing now, it didn't just arise even in the last few months. I mean, these folks have been waiting for an opportunity. And I think you all know that, when it was going to be right to bring up the idea of a hotel. I had this question posed to me 8 years ago. When do you think Siesta Key is going to be ready for a new hotel? And that was 8 years ago. So just remember that these folks plan 10 years out, and we have to understand that. But the good news is that what has been happening in these 10 years should show them that there's every reason in the world, just pragmatically looking at how we've developed and what we're able to do without such hotels is pretty phenomenal. So just know that we've been looking at what's in the background. We get online, we actually do get documents, and you can download them from the county site. So we're not without knowledge of this, just so you know. And I really appreciate everybody else is putting their hands into it to reach out and try to find out what you can. And we're in the background, just so you know, all the time, looking up, researching. So just know, if you stay connected with this project, you will be okay. We are really not missing too many things. And you might be surprised, but some things we don't share in the moment because we want to use them to help ourselves with first, if that makes sense to all of you.
I've got a quick question, if I may. Yes.
Okay, go
Yes,
for it.
question two.
This, I was at a number of meetings going back to, I guess it was the end of 2017, then there were meetings in 2018 that were planning commission meetings, that were county commissioners meetings. There was one, for example, it was in January, I'll just read from the Herald Tribune. A capacity crowd of Siesta Key residents, most wearing pinned yellow sheets of paper that read "Vote No," packed the Sarasota County Commission chambers Tuesday afternoon, hoping to see the board reject a key change in zoning that would allow commercial buildings less than a total of 35 feet to be built within 2 feet of the road. They politely listened to this, they nodded, and everybody had their say. Many of the same, with all due respect, Mark, many of the same things that you have talked about today in that great presentation were presented at those meetings. The whole issue of intensity, density, all of these issues were presented, and they politely listened to that and then voted for the changes anyway. It seems to me that they are not in the mood to be persuaded by logic, by precedent, by previous documents, all of which have been cited to them numerous times. It seems to me that the only thing that's going to stop this is litigation, and I wonder if
That's my question.
they're looking at that.
That was my question. Do we have an attorney representing us who is familiar with this field? We need somebody on our side to be able to dispute all this.
Yeah, we're treating it as a question of persuasion, that if they just understood all the problems of traffic and stormwater drainage and private beach access and all of these things, if they just understood that we could persuade them. I'm convinced after being at many of these meetings that no amount of persuasion, if Jesus Christ himself were to come and testify at these things, they would say, thank you very much. And then they would vote to go ahead and approve them. So I'm really quite skeptical of additional attempts at persuasion and feel that there needs to be some attempt at another path, perhaps litigation.
Litigation seems to be the only course. Do we know attorneys who specialize in this type of proceedings? It seems to me we need somebody on our side.
And if we
to
get
defend us.
if we get involved with litigation, of course, that will cost quite a bit of money.
But
all right, and I can tell you, living on the north end of Siesta in private home, that many of the people here have no idea, nor do they care what goes on down there. Most of them go off the North Bridge, and that's where their life is. All right, they don't understand the implications of what will happen. They need to be educated. We could get a whole group of people here on the north end supporting us if they only knew what was going on. And
There
we-
was litigation, I'm sorry.
Okay,
There was
think-
litigation on Siesta Promenade and they lost.
right, agreed.
So,
Yeah,
and
what I want to make sure that you all know is the way this has been organized is a little different than what happened, say 3 years ago. And I think that there's been things going on over the last several months, even before people were aware of the coalition being formed the way that it is. And part of that has been to be in conversations directly with some of the people that want to do this development. And we have good people now that understand development, such as Mark and a few of the other folks that are joined with us in this, as is members of the Chamber of Commerce, which is not something that I believe we had before, because there are people who worry about the function of their businesses, how they're going to operate. Those are things that are different. Our relationships include different people right now. And I think what we're doing is working directly with the facts that we see on the ground. We know that right now the law and the ordinances are on our side. If they went by the law and by the ordinances, they would not do this. It is going to take quite an effort to change the Unified Development Code. It's not a simple thing.
Okay,
So
Yeah,
next, I
guys-
think we're going to have to stop. If you have some questions or you have ideas, would you submit them to the Gmail account or send them to us at the info@Siesta Key Association as well? And so that we can even give you additional information. I know Mark would be really happy to do that. There's quite a few of us working in the background. And I just don't want you to leave this meeting today feeling hopeless, because that's what I'm hearing.
No, I'm quite optimistic, actually, and I'm not doing that from a naive standpoint. And
Yeah.
and even though I wasn't part my hands weren't in the previous fight. I do understand it, and I have had extensive conversations, and trust me, we're not approaching it in that way. Not that the good efforts that were done before were done in vain or not done thoughtfully, because they were. But like I said, having gone through this process before, there's other avenues, and I don't want to go through all of the strategy or tactics involved in that here. But we're absorbing everything you're saying. All of those things are being reflected on, and trust me that. But the biggest thing we could all do at this stage, as we're about to launch into the process, is be well connected. So join the SKA, join the SKCC, get email addresses so we can capture you when we do our blasts and discussions. Keep on to our webpage and doing that, because we will be activating everyone, but in a much different way than it was done before. In a much different way. And as Catherine said, there's different players involved. There's different relationships being enacted right now, and I don't want to go too deep into that.
Okay,